It says recording. Okay. Okay, I call to order the Yamhill County Board of Commissioners formal session for September 7th, 2023. It is 10:03 in the morning. And Commissioner Starrett, would you please lead us in the flag salute?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Thank you. That brings us to calendar session. I added the September 14th APT Business Oregon Press event at 3 p.m. We should be able to make that. Hopefully we don't have a long formal session. Is there anything else to add to the calendar?
I did ask Carolina to notice that the commissioners will be going over to the mission this afternoon.
Okay. Sounds good. Anything else to add? No? Okay. Item D is public comment. This time period is reserved for public comment on any topic other than an agenda item, a quasi judicial land use matter, or a topic scheduled for a public hearing. So if you're in the audience and you wish to provide public comment, now's the time to come forward. Or if you're online, please raise your virtual hand. Okay, seeing none, we will move on to department updates. And today we are joined by our sheriff, Tim Svensson. Welcome, Sheriff.
Good morning.
Morning, Sheriff.
And we have a request for a discussion of the permit to purchase guidance received by the OSSA.
Yes,
Quite a lengthy, and I'm assuming this was given by OSSA or
That was the legal counsel. for
Legal counsel.
OSSA.
okay.
yeah. So kind of a footnote to that. That legal guidance that was sent out was sent as a draft form. We actually have a meeting scheduled Monday morning at 9 o'clock as an executive board to discuss his recommendations and kind of
Okay.
formalize and do a final approval prior to our legal counsel, and the executive director has been subpoenaed to testify in the state trial that's coming up in October. And so some of this guidance was put together in prep for that testimony. And so they sent it out to all the sheriffs to review for a week or two, and then we were going to discuss it and ask any questions, clarify anything, make any changes that we felt needed to be changed. And then there'll be a final draft that will be approved by the executive board, hopefully sometime next week.
Sheriff, is that the Harney County? That's September 18th. That case, is this the one that's now been held in check by the state court?
Yeah,
September
for some
18th.
reason I was thinking it was in October, but yeah,
If that's that one.
it's the one that's still pending. Yeah.
Right. Can you give us a little bit of background? I think there's been so much and so many different court cases. There's a federal, there's state. And at this particular point, a federal judge in Portland has declared that this measure 114 is constitutional. There is a state injunction. Basically, the limitations would actually impact off-duty law enforcement, anyone who owns a shotgun or any size magazine, and pretty much effectively end legal sale of firearms in Oregon. And I don't think people understand what this means. And I thought maybe you could explain the permit to purchase, which isn't even going to happen because the FBI will not.
Correct.
So
Yeah,
anyway.
no, I appreciate that. Yeah, so it is a little confusing because the federal court judge did rule that they felt that it did not violate the Second Amendment. Obviously, that's probably going to be appealed to the Ninth Circuit. That could take a few years to go through the federal process. There's also a current case that's still being reviewed, I think, by the Ninth Circuit that's similar to, has to do with magazine capacity and a few other issues. The concern that we have, it has to do with the permit to purchase. The permit to purchase concept is something that we as in sheriffs across the state have figured that at some particular point in time may be like the next norm. The issue is it's repetitive to the CHL process. And there's no mechanism right now through the state of Oregon or through the FBI for us to process the permit the way that the statute is currently read. We don't have the ability to submit the background check and the fingerprints the way that we need to be able to submit them through the portal to the state to verify and then to return a submission saying that they've been approved. And the FBI has flat out said they're not going to accept the format that we're doing right now. So what that means is there's no legal mechanism for us to approve as a permit to purchase to issue the permit to purchase. And so some of the guidance that we're getting is kind of if everything was to stay as it is now, which we're hopeful that the state, the case that we have that's still moving forward may actually provide some relief to it. Even though the federal court ruled one way, it still doesn't supersede the local state case. But if everything was to remain as it is currently written through the statute, based off the guidance, which you can read through, Elmer does a really good job of explaining why there's just no way for us to issue that permit. As much as we would want to be able to go through that process, go through the background, get people approved, what we are required by the statute to do with the submission of the fingerprints and the background check and the verification that the background and the courses that they took met the standard. There's just no mechanism or instrument to push that through. Therefore, we would not be in a position to legally issue that permit to purchase, which means in essence, people are not going to be able to buy a firearm in the state of Oregon because the firearms dealers can't sell the firearm to an individual if they don't have that permit. So it freezes everything in essence in the state of Oregon.
Just for background, when do FBI background checks come into play in any other process that we use? Or how is it different from a CHL process?
Well, it's not really different. It's just a fingerprint. And so the fingerprints get processed through the state and then it goes through NCIC. And so what we're doing with the fingerprint is that if you run it through the state of Oregon's system, it'll identify issues that occurred in the state of Oregon, but it may not identify issues that occurred in Ohio or another state. And so with the federal fingerprint piece, we're wanting to submit the fingerprints at the same time to the NCIC through the feds, which will then allow us to do the required checks to make sure that they're not wanted or have a criminal offense in another state that would prohibit them from being able to purchase a firearm in the state of Oregon. And the conduit, I guess the one way to put it, to allow for that information flow between the state and the feds isn't there. And the feds have already told us that the way that the state is proposing to transfer that data to the feds, they're not going to accept. And so because we can't do the federal check at the same time we're doing the state check, we're not going to be able to issue that permit.
Has the FBI released anything officially saying that? I mean, I feel like who has the authority to say that?
I think they have just been communicating with the state police and saying that, and it's based off of our understanding of how the process works. We know it's not going to work. So I don't think the FBI has come out with an official statement saying, no, we will not accept it. We just know that based off of practice and in talking with the state police that the process that's in place right now is not going to work.
Okay.
So in essence, if let's say a woman or anybody's trying to purchase a firearm, the normal process would have been just to basically go to a gun store, pass the background check, if you could get through OSP, their background check backlog, and then you would have the firearm and then go through the CHL process to carry concealed. That is no longer an option in the state of Oregon. To legally purchase a firearm.
If this is upheld, correct?
But currently it is the law.
Yeah, so it's the law. So you go into a dealer and you want to buy a firearm. You do a fingerprint check, it goes into the database and you're in the queue. And it could either be instantly approved or not approved. If you get approved to purchase the firearm, the transfer can occur and you can purchase that firearm. So a lot of the dealers are following what's listed in the statute, that after so many days, if they don't have a response back from the state, they can transfer it to the owner. Some dealers have chosen that process. Some dealers have chosen not to do that because of the liability. I think it depends on what your profession is. I know some law enforcement tend to get transferred guns to them. Some gun owners or dealers have just said, I'm obligated to wait the 3 days. And then if I don't get a response back, I'll go ahead and transfer it to you. So that process that's in place right now, which was before this ballot measure, is still in place, still working. If we don't succeed in the injunction through the Harney County case, then in theory, the law would go into effect. And then the sales of firearms would come to a halt because the dealers can't process the sales until they have that permit to purchase in the hands of the buyer. And we are not going to be able to provide the permit to purchase as outlined in the statute.
Okay, so even purchasing a gun is now the same or similar to a CHL process. However, they both now include fingerprints going to the FBI's, somehow into the FBI's system to be checked against the national.
Yeah, the statute
system.
requires a federal background and the
Mhm.
FBI is saying we're not going to do that.
Okay,
And so we can't comply with that piece. The other piece that the permit to purchase requires is some sort of hands-on training. CHL doesn't require a hands-on training. They require a course only, and you can do it online. The permit to purchase shows that you have some sort of ability to possess and handle and load, unload,
Right.
disassemble. The question of whether or not they actually have to fire the gun is still up in the air. So the question is okay, how do you prove efficiency or the ability to possess a gun? How do you comply with that part? Do you have the individual who comes into our office bring in their gun and dismantle it and show that they can load it? Safety wise, we're not really keen on them coming in with loaded firearms and dismantling them in our lobby.
Mhm.
There's been talk that if the sheriff's office is going to allow for that compliance part of the statute, that we would have a handful of guns that are made safe, that don't have firing pins,
Mhm.
that have dummy rounds, and we just say, okay, as part of the permit process, okay, here's a handgun, can you please load it and show us that you can load it and show us that you can unload it? And then they do it, and then we check a box that says that they've met that requirement. The statute's not clear on what that is. State police and OSSA have worked for the last year trying to come up with what that standard would look like. We're trying to figure out who would be the best one to provide that. Is it a NRA instructor? Is it a firearms dealer? Is it the sheriff's office? Is it the police department? And they haven't really come up with a good understanding of who is going to be responsible for that piece of it. So if you can get through all of that part, and then on top of that, be able to have us do the background, process the fingerprints, process the background check, and do all that stuff and issue that permit, then they'll be able to purchase a firearm. The problem is that the FBI is not willing to comply with the part of the statute that has been outlined. So either the statute, the law has to change, or it has to go away and we just keep the process that we have right now.
Has OSSA shared this information prior to the Measure 114 election during that campaign? Any of the information that is now coming to light about how virtually impossible it is to comply with the requirements of Measure 114?
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of conversation around the implications of what 114 would have. One of the conversations that we've had at the state was we do a really good job of communicating with our legislators, but similar to ballot measure 110, it kind of snuck up. 110 was a completely different story because we were well aware of 114. But the association as a whole didn't do a very good job of doing a public comment of, hey, this is what it's going to show. There was a handful of times where they did communicate very publicly on what this might look like, but I think that it was too far down the line. I think that the messaging probably could have been a little bit better across the state as a whole of what this was going to do. The issue that we always come up with, and you're well aware of it, that we're always competing with at least 1 or 2 counties out of 36. And if you can get those 2 counties to support it, it doesn't matter what the other 34 counties say. And this is another example of where it was a knee-jerk reaction. The system in my mind is not broke. We have a process where people have to go through a background before they can purchase a firearm. We have a valid process for people who want to carry that weapon concealed. And that process in my mind is not broke. This is just an added step that people feel is going to make them safer. But at the end of the day, it's not going to, because as with all legislation when it comes to guns, it's the law-abiding citizens that get hurt because they're the ones who are actually going to go through the process. The ones who choose not to follow the law are still going to be carrying guns illegally. They're still going to be acquiring guns illegally, and they're still going to be committing crimes with those weapons. Something like this is not going to prevent those unfortunate events from happening.
Thank you.
Not to mention, which I'm sure your next question is going to be about the capacity. So,
Well, before we get there,
Yeah.
what happens? So let's say Harney County it's not successful. Presumably the measure goes into effect, it's law. What happens to existing CHL holders?
nothing for CHL holders. What it does is it, in essence, stops people from the ability of being able to go buy a firearm. So if you already own a firearm, you're okay. It's if you want to go buy a new one, we won't have a way of being able to give you that permit that allows you to go buy that firearm.
What it does, the impact to CHL holders is that you are now would be considered a felon carrying what you've probably been carrying all along, and they're
With the capacity issue. So
So-
it kind of segues into the second part of the ballot measure, which has to do with magazine capacity.
So now the requirements to be a CHL holder are lower than the requirements to buy a gun in terms of background checks.
It's one way to say it, because I mean, other than you have to show that you have the ability to handle the firearm, CHLs don't require that. I don't think the background checks are any less than what we do for a CHL holder. What a CHL holder is doing is we're doing a secondary background. You've already bought the firearm, and all we're doing is giving you permission to carry it concealed. So you basically are going through 2 checks if you're buying it. Let's say you never bought a firearm through a dealer, but you have a firearm that was given to you from a family member, or you acquired it some way, and now you want to carry it concealed. The second checks and balances that for a CHL holder is that we're going to run a background, and if you're not eligible to carry that concealed, we're not going to give you that permit. There are times where you could legally possess a firearm but not legally carry it concealed. It's kind of a weird thing in the state of Oregon, but it doesn't happen that often. But from a CHL perspective, all we're doing is giving you permission to carry whatever you already own concealed on your person. Where the weapon, the permit to purchase is, we're not giving you permission to carry it concealed, we're giving you permission to actually go buy it. So they're asking us to do a more deep dive background investigation and not allow the fingerprint process, which has already been in place forever, to be the background that you go through to purchase the firearm.
Okay,
So-
so the CHL process hasn't changed then.
No.
Okay,
The only difference is that if you go through some CHL courses, the instructors are now starting to hit on what is required of the additional instruction that's
Mhm.
required about Measure 114. They're doing that for a couple of reasons. One school of thought is if it's not legal for us to issue the permit to purchase, then why are we training on it? Well, the concept is they're training on it because it's good information to have. And if the law does go into effect and we can figure out how to manipulate the FBI background investigation part, then we're not going to have to send people who've gone through the training back through the training a third or fourth time. So if we can hit them all at once at the same time that they're going through the CHL. So the Oregon State Sheriff's Association, for example, had added a piece to it. I think they've since taken it off because there's some pressure to take it off because it's giving mixed messages that it's illegal, that ballot measure 114 is legal. The reasoning behind it was that if I got a new CHL holder who goes through the training this year, if they get that additional training of what 114 is asking for, it's not going to hurt them because it's going to make them more educated and it makes them eligible to get a permit to purchase a lot quicker. But if we don't provide that training to them now, at some point, they're going to have to go back and get that training. So if you currently own a CHL and you've had that CHL for 10 years, if 114 goes through and the state cases there, the state succeeds and 114 goes into effect, then before you can get that permit, you're going to have to get additional training. And that additional training is additional book work, online work, and some sort of hands-on training.
okay,
So
okay. But just to recap, the permit to purchase, which is the firearms sale part of this. If this goes through and the appeals are not successful, you will not be able to buy a firearm in the state of Oregon, period.
yeah, because we won't be able to issue that permit to purchase.
Okay, so the other part of this is the large capacity magazine piece, which is equally as daunting.
Yeah, so the large capacity, the issue with that is that you have magazines that can hold 20 rounds. You got magazines that can hold 15. You've got magazines that are designed to hold 10. 10 is the capacity. Well, the issue is the way the statute's written is that even that 10 round magazine has the ability to remove the plate off the bottom of the magazine to service the spring. And in theory, because you have the ability to do that, means that it could be altered to hold more than 10 rounds. The intent is for maintenance of the magazine to make sure it operates and functions correctly. But you do have the ability to remove that spring, put in a tighter spring that allows you to put 10 or 12 or 14 or 15 rounds in there. So because you have the ability to do that and alter it, then it's considered not legal. The conversation of, well, can you put rivets in magazines that are already being sold? And then the argument was, well, the rivet could possibly be removed and blah, 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 blah. So what they've essentially done is made it almost impossible to carry any type of weapon that has magazine capacity of more than 10 rounds. And the only way you're going to be able to say that it only holds 10 rounds is that you purchase a magazine from a manufacturer that has a plate on the spring that cannot be removed. I do not believe that there is one manufacturer in the United States or the world that manufactures that type of magazine. So that limits your ability to carry a gun in public or concealed or whatever to a revolver type gun that only holds 6 rounds. So the conversation comes up with, well, what about law enforcement? Because we carry our firearms off duty. There is no exemption for law enforcement. The only exemption is that if it's in their official capacity. There's not one sheriff's office in the state of Oregon that has a policy that says that in your official capacity, you will carry a gun off duty. There has been conversations of how can we draft policies that cover them under that umbrella. It becomes a very gray area, because if I start telling my staff, hey, you're required as a part of your job to carry a gun off duty, which gives them protection from 114 for if they are carrying a gun off duty on their own time, then that makes it a requirement of the job, which could open me up to being obligated to pay them or compensate them for the time that they carry their gun off duty, because they're doing it in an official capacity by the request of the sheriff. So there are affirmative defenses to this particular piece, which means that if you meet certain criteria, there is a defense that you can raise as that would make it so that you are not violating the statute. The problem with affirmative defenses is that they're not affirmative defense until you've already been arrested. So any protection that they have outlined in ballot measure 114 doesn't come into play until you've actually been cited or arrested for the crime. So if you have an affirmative defense that allows you to carry a magazine that has a larger capacity of 10 rounds, the process would be you'd have to be arrested, and then you'd have to be during the criminal justice process, you'd have to raise that affirmative defense with your attorney. And then they would have to go to the judge, and the judge would have to determine whether they agree with that affirmative defense. And you're at the mercy of the judicial system as to whether or not that affirmative defense will be upheld, and then it could be dropped. The issue is that the damage has already been done to your reputation, your criminal history, your job, you name it. There's issues. I can tell you from a law enforcement perspective, I don't care. I'm not going to be sending my staff out looking for people who are carrying magazines of greater than 10 rounds. I don't see where this is ever going to come into play. The only time I could see where we might add a charge or a violation of this would be if I've got a criminal who's been arrested for committing some sort of crime, and they robbed the 7-Eleven and they're carrying a handgun, and I charge them with 5 different crimes. This may be one crime that the DA adds on as an additional charge. Similar to the private background checks, where it's required to do a background check if you're going to sell a gun from a friend or to a friend as a private party background check. Our staff doesn't have the time or the energy to go out and search for people who are violating these statutes. And so even though it will still be on the books, it's going to be a crime. This is not something that our staff is going to be paying attention to or going out and looking for. Our hope is that they're going to be able to figure out a way to get around this. The Ninth Circuit Court case that's pending out of California specifically deals with the same magazine capacity issue. We're hopeful that that case is actually going to be overturned, which would provide some extra protection to the 10-round magazine, primarily because of a recent case out of the Second Circuit that supports that is a infringement on your Second Amendment right to limit the capacity that you can carry.
Just one more clarification, Sheriff. Irrespective of what happens in Harney County, the federal judge has ruled so that basically in this particular case, as it stands, any magazine is considered large capacity. So I think it's important that people know what we're looking at. And I don't think that's been clear because it's so convoluted. So I appreciate the fact that you're bringing this information to us.
Yeah, I mean, I owned a Glock that was, a really small one. It was designed for off carry. It carried 10 rounds. But once a year, I'd bring it in for qualification, and we'd pop the back of the magazine off, take it out, service the magazine, service the spring, and put it back together. That was a legally purchased firearm that was designed to carry 10 rounds of ammunition only. That would have never been modified by myself. But that, if I still owned that, would be a direct violation of the statute because I have the ability to take off that spring.
Even as the sheriff.
Even as the sheriff. The sheriff is not exempt. So
So-
it's frustrating. Our hope is part of the intent behind this guidance is and one of the reasons why it's in a draft form, it's just a process thing for OSSA so that the executive board can approve it. But the intent behind it is that this is going to be the legal guidance that we bring up in the case that says, if you move this forward, this in essence is going to completely stop the purchase, the ability to purchase a firearm in the state of Oregon, which is a direct violation of your Second Amendment rights. So I think do I think personally that we need to go through more background checks when it comes to purchasing firearms? No. The process that we had in place is working. People who are not allowed to buy a firearm can't get a firearm legally. The people who legally can't carry concealed are not getting concealed handgun licenses. So the people who are following the laws are applying, attempting to purchase, and the ones that aren't supposed to have them are being denied. The percentage of individuals who continue to commit crimes that continue to possess firearms illegally, they're going to do that whether 114 is on the books or not. And the frustrating part in the state of Oregon is that we continue to find or try to find ways to further legislate lawful gun owners to the point where we tie their hands. And it's not addressing the underlying issue that we need to address. And there are other ways to spend our time and money, and we should be investing it in other resources and other services to individuals in the community. So those who are struggling, those who are suffering from other issues, to get them the help that they need so that they choose not to either commit crimes or harm to themselves or others using firearms.
Thank you.
I just want to clarify that the large capacity magazine restriction, it's unlawful for possession or use. And it's a felony, correct? So this measure says that law enforcement is justified in arresting people as committing a felony for being in possession of a magazine that is capable of holding more than 10 rounds.
Correct.
And I think we're kind of coming full circle now on the Second Amendment sanctuary discussion, because it does come down to discretion. Because what essentially this does is it's telling, I'm going to say, a woman who has a CHL who carries for self-protection, even if she has and goes out and buys a 10-round mag because she wants to stay compliant, she's still a felon. Because there's no 10-round mag that isn't acceptable at this point. So I don't know how we prepare for this.
Yeah.
But most law-abiding citizens are not comfortable with that. They don't want to be in that position. They will go the extra mile to be in compliance. They will spend the extra money. And yet there's no path. So I think at some point we need to be prepared to tell the residents of Yamhill County that they are not under threat for wanting to protect themselves. And I don't know how we do that. We've tried.
Yeah.
We
No,
were
and
tasked
that's
for it, but
no, and I appreciate that. That's part of the reason why I made the statement earlier that my staff are not going to be, my direction to them is not going to be go out and look for people who are violating this statute. What that doesn't do is it doesn't change the fact that you have citizens out there, like you said, that are not wanting to violate the law. And they're not going to want to be put in that position where they could be violating the law if they're doing what they feel is right to protect themselves. And I don't have the right answer other than we have to be able to message however it comes out when this case is over. Fingers crossed, we don't have to worry about it because the case would be upheld or there's some sort of other injunction that's put in place. But if worst case scenario happens and nothing changes and we have to go forward with this, the large capacity magazine is going to be a huge stumbling block, because sheriffs across the state, even sheriffs up in the metro area, are saying this is not a priority. This is not an issue for us. This is not a concern. Why are you putting this in this position? And I don't know if there's any way for us to do a legislative fix after the fact, but at some point we're going to have to, like you said, communicate to the citizens of our county that say, listen, the unfortunate part is they're going to have to take the word of myself and of the board that this is not a priority and not of an intent for our staff. I can't control what the cities do. I can't control what the state police does. But I can tell you that similar to the private background checks, we have not arrested one individual or charged one individual with violating that statute for not doing a private background check for a private transfer of a firearm.
Well, maybe on the 18th, depending on, well, we won't know on the 18th, but
Yeah.
depending on that, the state has signaled that they are planning to appeal. So this could go on for a while. But if we could plan on a statement from your office that tells people what happened, what it means, and because it is very confusing.
Yeah, that'd be. The plan is for us to try to communicate as we can. I think OSSA is just kind of in a holding pattern because we have been called as witnesses. At least the council and the executive director, they're trying to do what they can to hold a little bit close to their chest some of their testimony on their positions so that we can kind of surprise the state on some of our approaches. And then once it gets through that part, I think that it's going to be the intent of at least council to give a clear direction to all the sheriffs so we can communicate with our constituents on how we're going to respond.
Appreciate that.
Any other questions?
No, I was just reading through it, see if there's any. You're grandfathered in if you already have one, but it seems like that's where the affirmative defense comes into play. after
Well,
you've been
so long as
arrested.
you kept the receipt and you can prove you had it.
But not even that, it's
Can't.
Yeah,
affirmative, you have to be arrested for it and then you do the affirmative defense. If I'm reading this correctly.
Yeah,
There are
it's
no
all,
serial numbers.
and it's all affirmative defense,
Yeah.
which is.
So that's shotguns as well, tubular fed shotguns as well. So
Yep.
no
All your
cover
duck
there.
hunters and target play, the skeet shooters and
Youth sports.
yeah.
I'm
4-H.
not familiar with the process for the youth sports, like target shooting and all that kind of stuff. What do the kids have to go through for that?
Oh, to be able to participate in that?
Mhm.
I don't think there's not a requirement for them to
There's no
go through, but
process.
I know that all the teams that
100%.
participate, they go through all sorts of
Mm.
safe handling,
Okay.
testing, and most of them are, go through the hunter safety course and a few other things prior to participating.
So
So
the
this-
issue is the firearm itself.
It's just
Yeah.
the firearm itself. It has the capacity to hold more than, well, most shotguns won't hold more than 10, but you have the ability to remove the
Mhm.
plug and put more than 10 in there.
So our 4-H kids that are competing nationally and bringing back some awards, they're out of business. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
So do you have like 2 seconds for another quick conversation piece that I thought I'd bring to your guys' attention? So as you know, we've got a grant through the Criminal Justice Commission on illegal marijuana grows. We've had a team shared between Polk County and ourselves for the last 2 years. This year, things have slowed. One that we had yesterday up in 240. I was kind of joking with Commissioner Sterrett this morning that to us, this is just another marijuana grow. But it's important for me to remember that to some of the citizens, that's not always just the case. It's probably a big deal no matter what. But part of the reasoning for wanting to talk to you guys today was in this particular case, I say just an average one because I had about 6,100 plants some of the larger ones that we've dealt with had 40, 50 greenhouses. This one had like 10 or 12, maybe a little bit more. They had about 350 pounds worth of dried product. So it's a good amount of dried product, but definitely not as compared to some of the other big ones we've done. It's a little bit smaller. The good thing on this one was we did get 4 adult males that were arrested. Some of these other cases, we don't always have the same luck of having so many people present. But it was a clear indication that this was a direct connection to some sort of ties to larger and criminal enterprises that are not from around here. A lot of the chemicals and stuff that they found on site that they're using for insecticides, stuff like that, are all coming out of Mexico. Not something that was
Paso?
Mexico.
Oh, they said Paso, like
Yeah.
Washington.
No, they're coming out of Mexico, which is, typically we find things that you could pick up at the local hardware store. This stuff is stuff that is being manufactured and sold in Mexico, which is telling us, obviously, this is where they're being supplied their resources. But the big piece is that the Criminal Justice Commission had 2 individuals, 2 representatives that are new to their board that participate in the grant cycle. They were actually on site with our staff during this operation. Their eyes were open immensely to the size of the operation, the amount of work that went into it. Good examples were there. We needed another piece of equipment to help with demolishing and basically destroying the product on site. And so we went to a local rental place there in Newburgh to rent it. And the CJC guy was like, well, how's that paid for? And our staff was like, well, we pay for it, but eventually they'll hopefully come from the grant. And she's like, well, how much money do you have left in the grant to pay for that? And we're like, well, we're not quite sure because it's not very clear in the process what they're going to approve and what they're not. So she was very supportive of the work that we did. She is supportive of the need in our community and in the central part of the state to increase some additional funds. There's been a lot of work at the state level through the legislature to reallocate funds. However, they've lobbied very heavy for that to be sent down south. And as I will tell both sheriffs down there, as they would be seated right next to me, yes, they have a need down there, but we also have the same need, or maybe even more up here. Because in addition to dealing with all those grows, we have a large amount of other issues to be dealing with, whereas some of the southern counties don't deal with the same type of criminal activity that we, or the call volume that we deal with on a regular basis. So the benefit with this was that they basically told our staff that they are going to be going back to the commission to start having conversations to try to figure out ways to streamline the process, get us hopefully some additional funding moving forward in the next grant cycle. We do have another grant cycle that will be opening up in the next few months. We're not quite sure when, but at that particular time, we have over the past partnered with another county. The amount of work that we've been doing and the amount of work that we have to do in our own county would support the need to kind of go on our own and do our own grant cycle as opposed to partnering. And so that's probably going to be the plan moving forward with the Criminal Justice Commission, is just apply for funding to assist us directly. So just wanted to give you guys a heads up that it was a good opportunity for them to be there. They really understood where we're at, why we need the additional funding, and they're hopefully going to go back and advocate pretty heavily for us in the next grant cycle.
Sheriff, yesterday at the ASA meeting, the ambulance service area, there were, Dr. Heiser, who's been very supportive of a mass casualty exercise, which we did, and it was really well executed. So kudos to your agency and the others that were involved. There was talk about increasing that, including other cities, including the tribe, getting folks countywide up to speed on I guess you could say more of a collaborative, cooperative, because a mass casualty incident or something like that would involve different jurisdictions. So if we can make that a focus and make that a priority, I know a lot of the agencies would be appreciative.
Yeah, and talking with the sergeant who put most of the training together, collaborated with McMinnville Fire, McMinnville Police. That is their ultimate intent, is to spread the wealth to all the other agencies, get more of the volunteer fire departments on board, get some of the smaller agencies involved as well. Given the length and the mass of the training, and you guys saw how much goes into that, they wanted to do the first one with the largest entities, McMinnville Fire, Sheriff's Office, the PD, kind of as a dry run to get an understanding of how the training went, kind of tweak some of the training so that's a little more streamlined, put it together in a way that makes it so that the next time they put it together, it's not as a heavy lift. And so, but they do plan on continuing that training forward. It's not that we're not going to continue to include the big players, but we're also going to bring in more of the smaller entities across the county. Because like you said, at the end of the day, if we have an incident, no matter where it's at in the county, every one of those entities is going to be showing up. And so we need to have everybody on the same page for that process with what the plan is, how it works. It's at least a familiarity of how we're going to process it. We're also going to have a ton of resources coming in from outside the county. But we have a way of dealing with that. We need to make sure, though, that our internal partners at least are all on the same page.
Thank you.
The bus that was yesterday,
Mhm.
is it safe to say or maybe assume that it was a cartel from Mexico?
Yeah, it's
Okay.
one of the, what we would consider a DTO, drug trafficking organization, depending on who exactly is running it. We're not quite sure, but it falls in line with all the other ones that they come in with one thing in mind, and that's to grow the marijuana illegally and process it and sell it. And that's all they're using the property for. So
Okay. In most cases, do they have a host, or is it that they're setting up, shell companies and sort of doing it that way?
yeah, I mean, I don't know a lot of the details on exactly what the back end looks like for funding it, but typically the people who are pulling all the strings and funding it typically don't even show up at the location. You have 2 or 3 different layers that are supplying it. So a lot of the resources are dropped off for them. They're doing a lot of the work on their own. And the individuals that we find at those locations are there for one reason. That's just to maintain it and cultivate it. And so they're more of the growers. Sometimes they don't even know where the finished product is going. And so we try to do everything we can to backtrack as much as we can on the entities. Typically it comes back through the property owner. So we start putting pressure on the person who's listed as the owner of the property.
Okay.
But if you have a property owner, because we've had a number of them, so it's occurring on somebody's property.
Mhm.
We're assuming it's not without their knowledge. So how are they implicated, and how can we address that from a prosecution standpoint?
So a lot of the forfeiture pieces is typically where we are able to get the property owner, because we have to be able to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the property owner knew that the illegal activity was occurring. Some cases we have the ability to do that through records. Other cases, the property owners probably didn't know what was going on. They just leased the property because it was a paying customer, and they, that's all they had was money coming in every month, and they never questioned it. But for the ones where we know that they were very aware of what it is, that's where we're trying to do a lot of the foreclosures and trying to find a way to take away property, take away value to the individual, which is one of the reasons why the appeal on the sublet case
Mm.
is so important to us that we want to be able to continue to have the ability to use that as a mechanism to combat the criminal activity, because sometimes that's the only way we can go after the individuals who are allowing the criminal enterprise to occur on their property.
Was this particular case elevated from the standpoint of having weapons seized and all of that?
Not that I'm aware of. I'm sure that there are some weapons that were seized there, which is not uncommon, but not to the level, I believe, than
That
some
we've
of
seen.
some of the other ones that we've seen.
Okay.
Yeah.
I guess I'm just, and I appreciate the effort to inform commissioners, because maybe it's just me, but it never ceases to amaze me that these things are pretty much in plain sight. I mean, we are just driving down the road and you look over and it's there. And it's not just a little greenhouse, it's all the way down in the ravine and it's pretty obvious. And I guess I'm wondering, you know, it would be helpful to know, are the neighbors, we know what our neighbors are doing, you know, and so are the neighbors feeling intimidated? Or are they just completely in the dark? Maybe they don't know, but it doesn't really make any sense that this stuff continues to go on, but maybe I would want to know if neighbors are feeling intimidated because of clear activity that is, you know, illegal, and perhaps they're being threatened or intimidated. So.
Yeah, I'm not aware of any of the cases that we had where any of the neighbors were aware of it and just felt like they couldn't report it because they were told not to. I can tell you that some of the cases that we've had were literally because someone's driving down the road and they smell a large amount of marijuana. And that's how we found one of the largest ones that we had up in Newburgh with a ton of weapons and ton of individuals. That one was literally, we could smell it. And so I think it's one of those examples where you drive by it every day and you're just doing your thing, and no one's really paying attention to what's going on because they're busy with life. And it's not until something major happens, or all of a sudden they can start smelling it because it's that time of year for it to harvest. Or there's other type of activity that's super suspicious that someone decides that, okay, we should probably call on it. In this particular case, I don't know how we got the information on it. But it's interesting, like you said, that sometimes how we find out about these are literally we stumble across them, as opposed to, and they're right there in broad daylight.
Yeah. And I think most people in the county are just kind of living their life. They don't realize that this element is here, and it can be quite dangerous. So I think that's the part that concerns me, is just making sure that we're aware of it so that we can help field any questions or anything. So
Problem is, you can do it in broad daylight and you don't know whether it's marijuana or hemp. That's the problem. It's okay. So there's some greenhouses out there. I mean, you can go knock on the door and see what you can do and identify whether it's hemp or marijuana, but that's one of the biggest problems with it.
Okay.
And they never should have legalized hemp, or at least with the program that they had in place and the $1,200 permit and no follow-up. Anyway, we could be here all day talking about that. So back to the grant.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure that when I like where we're going with it, but I want to make sure that we have all the numbers. I did a walkthrough yesterday, and I kind of wrapped my head around about everything that was involved with it. And when we're applying for that grant, I want to make sure that we know, hours, how many people, manpower, if there's any overtime that it took to have to go do all this, the equipment rentals, all that stuff. And make sure storing product for how many years afterwards.
Yeah. So
I want to make sure all of that is there. Not that we're going to get a full grant for that, but I guess everybody needs to know the impact that this has.
Yep.
And how long the impact is.
Yeah.
And the
Yeah, so
cost that is associated.
So in our internal process, we have project codes and a way to track through the timesheets. Our accountant tracks all the expenses that goes into. Part of it's for the grant specifically because we can bill all that back to the grant. So most of it has to be tracked already. But the amount of hours worked on the grow, whether it's overtime hours or normal straight time, because it was, a lot of the people that were there yesterday it's their normal day of work. But we still track those hours that they were spent on this particular event. But yeah, the intent behind tracking all of it, whether or not we get reimbursed for 100% of it in this current grant or not, is to show how much that impact is on our office moving forward, so that when we apply next time, we can, get a grant that's going to cover our full expense. Because the other pieces that aren't covered right now is the additional prosecution time, the time for the DDA and Brad Berry's office to prosecute these, to process the forfeiture paperwork that we want them to process. It doesn't cover any type of analyst that would be able to assist us in doing all the back end work, analyzing where the money's going, who's involved, all the parties, who owns the property, who's renting it, who's leasing. I mean, you name it, that's for one person to do. They can do that, for a full-time job. And so part of the conversation with the CJC, when they, just the little rental of that piece of equipment, for her to come back and say, well, where does that get paid for out of? Well, initially it'll get paid for out of our investigative fund, which we, budget for every year. But eventually we need to have that replenished through the Criminal Justice Commission, because the only reason why we're doing it is for this purpose.
Right.
And
it made the job go quicker by going and getting the piece of equipment too.
Exactly. So we do have a process already in place to do that tracking, to make sure that on every one of the cases we're tracking the time appropriately, so that when we bill it, we get reimbursed for as much as we possibly can.
And I don't know if you could put a cost to it or not monetarily, but there's a cost to those deputies having to be out there to do that when they could be out doing something else.
Exactly. Because, we got an entire detective division that's assisting on the warrant. Yeah, that's a part of their job, but their primary responsibility is, child abuse and sex crimes. And they're not doing that work because they're assisting in other areas.
Right.
Okay. Any further questions for the sheriff?
It might be advisable to have more regular updates from your department, because there's a whole lot going on in between updates. I know it's not the same perhaps for the other departments, but it's a lot of stuff people need to know about.
Right.
So I've
Yeah.
talked with my staff. The undersheriff is working on a process right now to start including you guys in more emails. As you guys get stuff that comes across your desk, if there's something that catches your eyes that you have questions about, or you want to start scheduling me to come in more frequently just for a quick update, just let me know and we'll make sure that we get you the information you guys need.
Yeah.
The hope is to try to get you guys stuff as timely as possible. I can tell you that there has been times where a major incident goes down and I'm getting phone calls from people or text messages asking me what's going on. And I haven't received a phone call yet from my own staff. So there will be times possibly where even as we start moving forward with this new process for our command to be shipping you guys information, that there may still be times where it might take a little bit of a time, but we're going to try to do it a little bit more timely. And it will be more than just warrants. It's going to be a little bit of everything that we're dealing with. So it gives you guys a good idea of what our staff's dealing with on a regular basis.
Thank you.
I think the other kind of high priority piece for me is the fentanyl issue. So if we're experiencing busts around fentanyl, a lot of that might be in the cities, which it makes it a bit more complicated.
Yeah, I was
but-
waiting for some of our staff to get in this morning to ask them a little bit more about if we had any major fentanyl cases. But yeah, I think most of them are coming from the cities.
Okay. Okay. Well, thank you, Sheriff.
Yep.
Appreciate
Very
it.
much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. All right. Have a
Thanks.
good day.
All right,
See
you
ya.
too.
You
Thank
too.
you.
Okay, so we will move on to work session. There's nothing today on the work session calendar. Our consent agenda has some meeting minutes and appointments. So I will move approval of the consent agenda. Is there further discussion?
I have one question about an item 2 on our consent agenda,
The surplus?
G2. Yes. So maybe Commissioner Johnston, you would address this. I looked at the, what is it, 140,000 miles that we're replacing vehicles? Well, not for nothing, but I'm driving a vehicle right now that has a whole lot more than that, and I'm gonna drive that thing into the ground. So I look at how quickly we say, okay, 140,000 miles. And then I think about just overall, we replace laptops after a certain number of years, and our buses, you know, so I'm looking at that and saying, maybe are we being just a little bit too generous with this mileage?
I would agree, and I come from kind of that same mentality, but the one key factor to government or police cars for sure is they have to, on a call, be able to make it to where they're at. And so that's probably the mileage that they set to where it's not maintenance or breakdowns. There's probably a curve to it, to where that's when they get replaced, because that's the optimal time so that they can still make it from point A to point B without breaking down. I can do a follow-up with Mark on that, but I am 100% with you. Drive it till it's done, or maintenance costs outweigh
Right.
what, the worth is. But when you throw the aspect in of they have to be, on a call and have to make it from point A to point B, it changes things a little bit. Same way with the bus. Bus can't just break down with, 12 people on it. They got to keep things newer and lower miles.
Even diesels?
Diesels will definitely last a little bit longer for sure. So there's different factors.
Okay.
But I believe we are selling this to the city for 6,000.
Yes, we are
Just for
recouping
Yeah.
costs on it,
What-
$6,000.
what it would sell for.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then buying a new one is
Oh,
probably upwards of
Um,
75,000.
just for, I can compare it to a dually work truck, work model, like no bells and whistles, you're $57,000. And that's without a bed on the back, and you're another 7,200 to 13 grand for a bed on the back.
Mhm.
My first house didn't cost that much, so it just.
Everything is getting so expensive.
That's crazy. Okay, all right, so,
Yep.
yeah.
I did move approval.
Yes.
So if there's no further discussion, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
I,
Aye. All opposed, same sign. Okay, motion passes. Thank you. Okay, item H, old business. H1 is discussion regarding the excuse me, good grief. Discussion regarding the potential closure of High Heaven Road Gate, and this was continued from August 31st of 2023. So just a quick update, we have a tour scheduled of the area tomorrow, starting at 1 o'clock, and we will have members of ODF, BLM, the Sheriff's Office, Hampton, Weyerhaeuser, local residents from the area. And then Commissioner Johnston and I will be there,
And
and
MacFire,
MacFire, sorry. Mhm.
three people from MacFire.
thanks for putting this together.
I'm actually blown away how quick and how many people are like, yep, we'll be there.
Yeah.
Blew me away.
Yeah, and so the purpose really is to just, we're the final arbors, if you will. So I would like to see it and just see the area, make sure I can visualize the residents having to potentially get through a locked gate, what the evacuation routes are, exactly, et cetera, et cetera. And I think we're going to tour the Ball Bearing Hill fire as well. So that is happening tomorrow. So we will come back next week with the results of that tour. Moving on to item I, other business. I1 is consideration of approval of the 2023-25 Community Corrections Biennial Plan. Commissioners, I will move approval of I1. Is there further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, same sign. Thank you. Motion passes. I2, consideration of approval of intergovernmental agreement number 6554 between Yamhill County and the state of Oregon Department of Corrections for the funding of community supervised felons retroactive to July 1st of 2023 through June 30th of 2025. I don't believe this one made it into the packet, but it was in the email from Jessica. So we might need to add this to the packet, but this is regarding probation, parole, and post-prison supervision. So I will move approval. Is there further discussion?
None.
Okay, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, same sign. Thank you. Motion passes. I3 is consideration of approval to authorize the Department of Community Justice to submit Yamhill County's Phase 2, 2023-25 Criminal Justice Commission JRI formula and supplemental grant application. And if you recall, we approved Phase 1, which was the narrative about how the funds will be used. This is Phase 2, which is the budgetary component. So I will move approval of item I3. Is there further discussion or questions?
No.
No.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, same sign. Great, thank you. Motion passes. And looks like that's it for other business. Item J is public hearings. We have nothing today. And item K is our announcements. Commissioners, any announcements?
No.
I got none.
I just have a brief one. So I'm the liaison to the McMinnville Safety Task Force Group. It is a task force group of roughly 20 to 25 people. Folks from the fire department and the city and business owners, mainly business owners. And they now are up to about 2,000 followers on their Facebook page. The Facebook page is supposed to be informative of, some of the issues that are happening in the city of McMinnville in terms of transient activity and things that are happening with businesses that are impacting the local economy. One of their goals is to have safety zones around the schools in the city of McMinnville. And so this is something that several other cities have already in the state of Oregon. And it basically is just literally a zone around a school where you can't have transient activity or vagrancy, no camping, because of the safety issues that it presents to the children that attend the school, as well as their ability to walk and bike to school. So they they've been seeking this with the city. So far, they have not been successful in having the city respond to that request. So I'm encouraging that all parents who are interested in this or city residents who are interested in these safety zones attend the city council meeting, which is next the 12th Tuesday. Yes, Tuesday. So on September 12th at 7:00 p.m. I sincerely hope that the city of McMinnville is responsive to these concerns. We've been seeing a lot of issues show up with children who are trying to get to school and they're having issues getting to school safely. So I hope that they prioritize this request, and it's as simple as amending one of the city ordinances to include it. And
Has the
hopefully
school board weighed in on it at all?
they did talk about it at a school board meeting. I don't know what the status is, but they did seem receptive to the idea. It seems pretty common sense to me that you'd want to keep the kids safe. So,
Thank you.
so I will continue to give updates as the liaison to the group and keep everyone informed, but encourage you to attend next week if you live in the city. But that's about it for today.
Cool.
Let's see. Anybody else have any announcements or updates or anything for today?
Just that our meeting with the executive director of AOC yesterday, Dr. Gina Nickel, went very well. I feel that it was encouraging to hear the understanding of rural communities and some of the issues that we face that in Yamhill County and rural counties that are not being addressed not only by the legislature, but by OHA. And, I will reiterate that for years, we've had no response from OHA for our problems. And it really does speak to the issues that local government has, especially the counties as the local public health authority and the mental health authority, to address some of the issues that OHA has basically tuned us out. So at some point in time, might be a good idea to defund OHA, give the money to the counties and let us do what needs to be done because OHA is doing an abysmal job.
Okay. I had a thought and it escaped me, so I'll save it. Okay, if there's nothing else for the good of the order, I will adjourn the Emma County Board of Commissioners formal session for September 7th, 2023. It is 11:13. Thank you.
Oh.
Well,